Welcome to Permission to Thrive. I'm your host, Suzi Lula. As a spiritual therapist for over 20 years, I have the honor and privilege of ushering women and mothers just like you on a journey from simply surviving to powerfully thriving. I also have the honor of raising our son, Will, who is now a young adult, with my longtime partner, Jamie, so I'm right there on the journey with you. Consider this your personal sanctuary, your space to meet your heart, embrace your messy, and come home to your most authentic, extraordinary self. My hope is that you leave resourced and inspired because you are here to shine. Welcome to Permission to Thrive. Welcome everyone to this week's Permission to Thrive episode. I feel really privileged and honored in my life that I have fellow soul care coaches that I feel so respectful of. I just respect you, Maureen and Joe and Devon, your own practice and the way that you work both with your own clients, with your own family, but the way that you practice in your own lives. I'm so grateful to get to be in relationship with all of you. And so I invited you guys back because I wanted to talk today about an area that I think people can get really stuck with. Anyone listening, permission to thrive. We all have an intention to live that thriving life where we're blossoming and we're flourishing and we have deeply connected relationships with each other so that when we get to the end of our lives and we're looking back, it's like, I felt connected to my children, to my spouse, to my friends. I lived that rich quality of life. And often I find, and this is why I'm inviting you guys, that where we can get stuck is when the uncomfortable emotions come up, where that which is uncomfortable, intense, the pain part of life, and we haven't been taught how to be present with the uncomfortable. And so I created something that I call the emotional messenger system out of years and years of working with clients and students. It is a way for us to be in relationship to those really intense emotions that can come up. And so I've invited you guys for us to have a conversation about how we have cultivated and still cultivate our own relationships with being with that which can be so uncomfortable in life. So I'll just say a couple of quick things and then I'll go around. We can each have our voice here fully expressed. I call it the emotional messenger system for a reason. So what do we know about emotions? Emotions are energy in the body. So first and foremost, emotions are held in the body. We feel emotions in the body. You think of a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, they want what they want and they feel what they feel in their body, their whole body. Make no mistake about it. They share how they feel in the body, but we are taught over time to disconnect with the body. And so often we feel the emotions in the body, but we're taught to move to the head. And we are learning with the emotional messenger system is how to meet an emotion with the heart, how to meet an emotion in the body with the body. And so I wanted to speak to that part of it. Emotions are energy in the body, and as well, the emotional messenger system, that these emotions that we feel in the body, they have messages for us. So again, in culture, we're taught resist the emotions because they don't feel good. And yet, what I have learned through working with so many individuals is that when we lean in to the emotion, when we befriend not the emotion itself, but we become curious, interested, what is the message that you're trying to tell me? I'm interested, I'm curious, please give me that message. And when we receive the message, the body subsides, the energy subsides, we complete the connection, and the emotion then can move through because we've heard it's done its job. It got our attention. We heard the message. Now we go fulfill the message. So that's a kind of succinct way of an explanation to those of you who are listening. I'm going to go around to each one of you guys now. Welcome. And for those of you listening, we each hope in your own way that you will leave this conversation more willing, more interested to befriend this uncomfortable, intense stuff that often comes up that's seen as something to resist, but actually is a portal and a gateway to profound intimacy, both inside of ourselves and with others. So, with that said, welcome Maureen and Joe and Devon back. I'm so happy to have you guys. And Maureen, do you want to just jump in and share a little bit about your relationship with your emotions and anything you want to share, the before and the after of Maureen's journey with her emotions?
Thank you, Suzi. So happy to be with you all again today. And that intro was wonderful. I'm going to first say, before I go back to how I related to my emotions, that for any listener today, when I first discovered your work, it was through your classes. And it wasn't through the certification, it was through the classes. And there's quite a few great ones, but the emotional messenger system is so excellent. So I'm going to say off the bat, if you're a listener and you're inspired after you listen to this, go check that out because for a very nominal fee, you're going to have a gold mine of information about how to learn about
Mm,
your emotions. And I'm going to say too that I think as a child, I was thinking back on my life and how as a youngster, I felt so many emotions like we do. And it wasn't a place when my family members were together that there was a lot of room for expression. So I
mm,
remember being alone with my emotions a lot. I
mm,
remember I shared a room for a long time, but when I got my own room when I was about 11 or 12, I can remember that time in my life, and I would go and I would cry and I would scream and I would rage and I would be angry and I would do all the things into my pillow and I would put my face down. So even then, as I was expressing the emotion, it was muffled and I was still trying to hide it. And
mm,
so I remembered for me in particular, I think I remember my teenage years a lot because by that time we know for untended to emotions, not having safe places to go, not expressing them, then internally they can feel like so much. And I think I acted in towards myself and I acted out a lot. But I have to say that I carried those patterns through my 20s, my 30s, even my 40s. I really did. And so the ways in which I couldn't and didn't relate to my emotions in healthy ways, I had a therapist, but it felt like that was a sounding board for me a lot, like, "Oh, that was a loss in your childhood," or this, but nothing really that was functional in me both understanding and working with my emotions. And so it was messy. I'd say it was messy. I would say it
mm,
was a toxic swirl. I would say it was out of control. The big word that came to me was overwhelm.
mm,
And as you were describing the emotional messenger system, when I began to learn about, gosh, what are these emotions? My body is speaking to me. I started to become curious. I wondered what they had to say to me. But it allowed me to finally move from overwhelm to greeting them individually. Even the way I refer to it, like referring to yourself as like a toxic mess. Well, that's not very safe, is it? And I had a lot of judgment about myself, a lot of criticism, self shaming around these emotions that I couldn't figure out. And
mm,
maybe I was thinking like other people figured theirs out, but I knew that inside I was not making sense of any of this. And for me, I had an illness that woke me up. And so when I discovered your work, just a few years after that, about 3 years after that, I just really woke up. And when you were talking to the emotions and then the other teachings around it, like the compassion, do I even have needs? What are my needs? Inner child work, survival self, all these other parts to it, but that emotion is so central to us looking within and asking the questions about what our needs are. But then I think what I meant by that, like a single emotion coming up, like maybe it was the resentment, maybe it's anger. Lately, it's been a lot of sadness. Now, what I do through your teachings of, oh, befriending the emotion. Oh, hi, what are you here to tell me in such a compassionate, friendly way? And I'm bridging over a lot here, a lot that I've learned through your teachings. I described the Maureen before of like that overwhelmed jumble of emotions all enmeshed with one another to a Maureen who can ask the questions, greet myself compassionately. I'm so in touch with my body now. I can name what it is. I can say,
Mhm.
this feels like more anger. This feels sadness. This feels frustrated, whatever these parts are that are trying to be known. And I'm getting to know them better. So now I look a little deeper and I sit a lot with my emotions. I let it be felt in my body and I sit. And I know if I'm trying to avoid it like I used to, that I can call myself to come sit down on the couch, to come get out my journal, just to be a little or a lot more spacious with it, to no longer have judgment for it. Because so many of us learned in our childhood these emotions were not good. They were to be tucked away. They're not acceptable. And now, when you taught me too that we don't have judgment of these ones being good and these ones being bad. And they're just all here for us. And if they're energy and motion, then that's all they are. I want to release them from my body. I no longer want to have them stuck. I don't want to relate to them in the same way. But that's
Yeah.
some of where I came from and some of where I am now based on the teachings.
It's so beautiful. And you're right. We could do an 8-part series. Even with an 8-part series, barely scratch the surface of how to be present with those uncomfortable emotions. That's why we have an entire culture that is unable, for the most part, to be with our emotions because it is a journey. So I'm appreciating what you're saying. You said so much, but I will say, the heart of what I think I'm hearing you say that is a profound takeaway for anyone listening, especially if you're just leaning in and asking, okay, well, I see on Instagram all the time we're supposed to sit with our emotions, but I don't know how in the heck to do that, right? I think that what you're saying is at the heart of an emotion, it's a message coming to us, but most often at first, because it's jumbled, I call it a knotted energy, because it's a jumble of many emotions, the first thing we typically do is then judge the emotions or judge ourselves for still having the emotions. And so you have this knotted energy of many emotions that are tangled up. And then you add self judgment or self criticism to it. And you actually move yourself farther away from being able to sit with it. So I think what I heard you say was in your journey, part of it was that you moved from the awareness of, oh, I'm judging, I'm criticizing these emotions because that's what I've been taught, to befriending, compassion, safety. There's this George Washington Carver saying, when you love something enough, it will reveal all its secrets to
Mm,
you.
yeah.
And I love that saying where emotions are concerned because we aren't taught to love rage, to love sadness, you said. We're not taught that. But when we do love, oh, tell me all about it. And that speaks to the compassion. Oh, tell me all about it. I can tell you're feeling so sad. When you love something enough, it will say to you, yeah, I'm really sad because, and then you create that intimate connection. So, my takeaway
Hmm.
hearing you speak is that you have learned to move from a judgmental, critical way of being with yourself around emotions to a way of really inviting yourself to go sit with, befriend with compassion and safety. And it's a brilliant first step. It's a really descriptive way to look at it. And for anyone listening, give yourself just that first taste. How might I be judging? And how might I simply move to more interest and curiosity? You have a message for me. I really want to hear the message.
Yeah. Yeah. Susie, and I want to share this quote that you said in the emotional messenger system,
Mm.
because it really, when I reread it, it said, in order for the emotions to feel comfortable, housed within you, to share with you what their message and insight is, they must feel safe within your consciousness. And that was really striking because they want to feel safe. And so cultivating that consciousness of safety they're going to feel more safe to begin to reveal. So it's no surprise to me now that more sadness is coming, and the things that have been suppressed in the past, even I'll just say briefly, as I've lost my parents in the last 6 or 7 years, the both of them, I didn't learn how to grieve. And so through the years, maybe I didn't grieve my mother when she left, but through this years of cultivating safety, all of a sudden the sadness is like, I'm here. And we can't discern where the heck that sadness is from, but it could be from unprocessed material that I had no way to process it when it occurred.
And I love what you're saying. I always say self criticism and self safety cannot coexist. So as we become aware, oh, I'm being critical and judgmental of myself, and we set an intention, oh, I want to seek a different way of being with myself, then that self safety can blossom, because self criticism and self safety cannot, you can't have judgment and safety at the same time. If you were judged as a child, you did not feel safe. And so then we internalize inside of ourselves, if we're judging, we will not feel safe. When we intend and start practicing neutralizing the judgment, the safety will start to blossom as you're describing. So that's so beautiful. Thank you. Joe, you want to share anything about how you are more able to be with them today, perhaps, than in the past?
Yeah, this is such a rich conversation. And I would love to have lots of time with this. Maureen, thank you so much. I identify when I was young, I mean, the emotional messenger system to me is like my personal GPS. It tells me when I'm in alignment and integrity with my most authentic self and when I'm out of it. So, this whole concept about feeling safe to experience my emotions. When I was younger, for those of you out there, I'm a baby boomer guy, and it was not safe to express almost any emotion. I was raised by a drill instructor, as some of you know, and I can see it on your face when I started to emote something. So I learned from the neck down how to shut down, absolutely shut down, and I became an expert at it. That was my survival mechanism. When I got into therapy, it was like, oh, we're going to need to access those emotions. I have no idea how to even begin to, I have no idea what I felt. I just knew something was off and something was wrong. So as we began to open that box, my emotions weren't just like, oh, here's a little happiness, here's a little anger, here's a little sadness. It was rage. I mean, they were so extreme, as Maureen was saying. I felt overwhelmed and I had no container by which to be present with it. It was too much for me. And slowly, 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 did I say slowly? I began to get in touch with what was really going on at the time it was going on. Oh, I know what I'm feeling here.
Mm.
And that was revelatory because I knew how to intellectually think, oh, you should be upset by this or angry by this or happy with this. But it was all intellectual. As those feelings began to come up and I began to get in touch with them, I began to discover my own internal truth. So I actually explore and I become curious about all emotions. Say, for example, like when I'm really angry and I sit with that and say, okay, what message do you have for me? And that's an objective perspective. I'm able to actually not right in the moment always, but when I can sit and lean into that emotion and say, okay, what gift, what message do you have for me? And just to be present with it. And then I begin to see, oh, you've taken on somebody else's belief system. That's why you're angry. That doesn't belong to you. But that requires diving deep and going deeper with it to see what is true for me and what have I taken on that doesn't belong to me
Mm.
externally. Be it
Mm.
a society or family or a partner. Oh, that's not mine. I'm reacting as though it is. But that requires going in and doing some really deep inner work. Likewise, something really wonderful happens. Oh, that feels great. I'm being validated. I'm being seen. I'm being heard. I'm being acknowledged. And then that's like oxygen to me because that didn't exist when I was young. But boy, bring it on now. But what happens emotionally, if I'm in touch with that, it's like, oh, you're attaching your sense of security and well-being to that experience in that person. So just be aware. It doesn't mean I can't feel joy. Of course I do, or love or happiness or all those things. But I'm just aware of their external origins, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
that awareness of those emotions gives me freedom. It
Yeah.
gives me freedom to navigate, to grow in awareness and consciousness, and simultaneously not identify those things as the source of my well-being and my sense of security and my sense of essence. I can experience rage. I can also experience joy. But when I look at those things, I can come back to center. And it may take an hour, it may take days, it may take weeks to kind of really get in touch with what's really going on, given those dynamics. But if I'm willing to be present, and the two tools, Suzi, that you've given us that have served me so well, I constantly use is compassion and non-judgment. That's what creates the safety. And that's exactly what creates the environment for me to have these emotions come up so I can be present with them.
Yeah, I think that you and Maureen are saying something so parallel in your own way. You're both alluding to safety and how when we're younger, we aren't often externally given that safe space for our emotions to be expressed. And therefore, then we internalize it. And so inside of ourselves at the beginning, we don't have that safety to have our emotions expressed. And then that's why they get all jumbled up and we feel overwhelmed because we're really experiencing 2, 3, 4, 5 different emotions that we haven't learned how to name and we haven't learned how to untangle.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're both saying that safety is so important. And you've both talked about self-compassion. And so I want to speak to that for a moment before I go on to Devon, because compassion can also feel very elusive. And what is compassion? And Maureen, you were alluding to an illness and you were alluding to yourself when you were young and Joe being raised by this military dad and learning to survive from your neck down. When I'm hearing other individuals share your stories, I feel such an overflow of compassion in my own heart. How do we feel compassion for our own messiness, for our own certain recipe of messy emotions? And I always hear that phrase, it's so understandable. It's so understandable that Maureen wouldn't have had that voice of sharing her emotions when she was little. It's so understandable that Joe, raised by a military dad, would learn how to push those emotions down. It's so understandable. So for all of you listening, that is a takeaway. It's a bridge, it's a portal to giving yourself the experience of what does self-compassion feel like, whatever you're feeling, whether it's overwhelm, anger, rage, sadness, grieving, a combination of all of the above. It's saying to yourself, it's so understandable based on the way I was raised, based on what my culture has told me, based on my experience, based on my journey. It's so understandable that I would be judging. It's so understandable that I wouldn't have a clue. It's so understandable that I'm nervous about sitting with all of this. It's so understandable that I still resist. It's so understandable that I'm still acting out. It's just so understandable that I have found is a nice portal, a nice bridge and doorway to creating the safety that you guys are so beautifully talking about. So thank you very much. Those are two great takeaways. And Devon, I want to open it up to you. Anything that you want to share, give us a picture in to your relationship with emotion.
It's just all so relatable. Everything that both Maureen and Joe shared. Yeah, my whole way of living is different because of the emotional messenger system, because not just from my family of origin, but through society. And I love what you said, Joe, about the GPS. I was operating under the GPS was outside of me, and the external pieces of my life were telling me if I was worthy and if I could be at peace and contentment. And I loved one of the things you said in the course was 98% of the work is inner work and 2% is external work. And that completely, my paradigm flipped on that statement alone, because I realized that I was micromanaging and controlling and fixing the external pieces of my life so that I could feel at peace and feel content. And then I realized that I could reach that internally. And so that was one way that I shifted. And the other way that I shifted was I didn't know that emotions and my pain had a purpose. And so I thought emotions were just something that I had to endure, were challenging to sit with. But once I understood the perspective that, oh, my pain has a purpose, these emotions have a message and insights, and they have a gift to give me. And by me creating that safe space, by me being a deep listener and creating safety and compassion and a willingness to say, come, tell me everything. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Tell me everything. In a way, it's like a loving parent. Like we are, in a way, reparenting ourselves. Even if you had the most wonderful parents, it is a skill that you can take with you anywhere you go in life. And so that's another way that it has transformed, because I'm a recovering fixer. And so in the past, I would have an intense emotion. I would sit with it for a little bit, but it would be hard to sit with it, especially not knowing that it had a purpose or a message. And then what I would do is I would suppress it, or I would numb it with being chronically busy, or having a glass of wine, or watching Netflix, or a myriad of ways to avoid the emotions. And now it is different. I feel it and I say, ooh, there's something there to glean. And so whether it's in the moment or later, sitting with the emotion, and it is a practice. And I loved what you said in the course of don't go for the big emotions first, start small and begin to create that intimacy, that connection, that relationship with your emotions, and that capacity will grow over time.
Yeah.
That is something that has really transformed, because in the past I would have wanted to make that go away or fix it or improve it or change it. And now it's a different energy. It's a different relationship. It's a different way of being with myself.
Yeah.
So that also is noticeable.
Those are amazing insights, starting back with your first one. And I think everyone can relate to this. We're all so externally oriented. And so we are taught that if I can control my external world, then I can control my internal world. And I think we all quickly find that that isn't effective and it doesn't actually work. But it is because we haven't been taught when we were young. We just haven't had the experience of someone sitting with us saying, oh, tell me all about it. Of course you feel like you were left out at school today. Of course you're feeling like you don't belong. It's so understandable that you would feel that way. Tell me more about it. What happened? And then when we are gifted that modeling, we haven't heard the modeling. So then as adults, we feel what we're feeling, we experience the emotions, but we don't know how to be that presence because it wasn't modeled. And so I call it a language. We aren't really taught the language of how to be present with our emotions. We have the mind, the language of the mind. We have the mental language, but we aren't taught the language of the heart, the language of what compassion sounds like. It's literally like if you have never been taught French, you don't know how to speak fluent French. We weren't taught this language. And so I like to use these phrases that I'm hearing each one of you use. I'm hearing you use the phrase of, it's so understandable. Tell me more about it. I'm so interested. Just if you take away nothing today, but these three phrases, oh, it's so understandable that you would feel left out. Oh, it's so understandable that you felt self-conscious. Oh, it's so understandable that you felt really angry. Oh, it's so understandable. You're not condoning a behavior, but you're expressing so understandable. I so see. So therefore, you're connecting to it. Tell me more about it. I want to know. I'm interested. That is creating safety. And when you say, I'm so interested, tell me more about it, then the messages that have been there, pay attention to me. This is what I've needed from you. This is how I'm feeling. They will come with abundance when you give them these simple phrases, inviting them out. So I thank you. The externalization, most of the work is 98% internal. We just have not been taught. We're all in agreement. Like, I'm fine to go sit with myself, but I don't know what to do once I sit down. Give me that roadmap. So you're sharing phrases that work for you. And when you get just the feeling, just like you would if it was a 3-year-old, if it was a 6-year-old, tell me more about it. When you just begin to enter into that energy, oh, now I start realizing, and we go from there. So I'll go around again. Maureen, anything and specific example or anything that you want to share as takeaways?
Yeah, well, thank you. And I love the shares. And Devon, when you just use the words, sometimes I would numb out, and some people might be shopping, some, like you said, glass of wine, the overdoing is perfect. It made me think about the ways in which we bypass our emotions.
Mm.
And I've done it. I see family members do it. I've seen clients do it. And it's not a bad thing. It's just the way that we didn't learn how to do it. And so I was just thinking about how sometimes now I can sacred listen and I can create space for the other. If I am to ask, what are you feeling or what's coming up? I'll see the subject change. I grew up in a household where my mom would always change the subject. I might share something when I was older, a little heartfelt, and it would be like, oh, the neighbor down the street is doing this. And I would just want her to come back. But that kind of bypassing, and when I've seen others change the subject, go off in another direction, it reflects back to myself. And where do I do that still? And where do
Mm.
I bypass my own emotions? And I've learned to sit, but I think Joe was saying it, it's slowly, slowly, slowly. And I loved how, Joe, you said, I'm here for it. And you named anger, because anger was an emotion that I was not comfortable with. And to name it and have that acceptable is so exceptional. But that whole I'm here for it reminds me, Suzi, of your teaching on the beginning of the emotional messenger system. You say, no one put a guarantee out there that this life was going to be pain-free.
Mhm.
And there is this thinking that it's going to be. I don't know where we learn that per se. Maybe it's just because we have to tuck so much away. But if we can understand that things are going to happen, losses are going to occur. So I don't know if you want to say a bit about that, but Joe's statement, I'm here for it, tells me that he understands that pain is part of life.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
love both of these two things. And thank you for catching what Devon had shared about numbing out. And I do want to speak to both of those things. And I'll start with the last thing you said, which is why I love this work, because we are all souls, we're all spirits, we're all beings having a human experience, but we are so much more than simply our human experience. And so, from the soul's point of view, the soul knows that it's coming on to this particular plane, and the soul already knows it's going to be messy, and that we are going to experience, from the soul's perspective, grief and loss and pain is all part of our humanity. It's all part of what brings us together. When I'm thinking of you sharing that you've lost both of your parents in the past 6 years, being present with your grief allows me to feel more intimately connected to you. So the soul of me doesn't resist your pain. The soul of me knows that that's actually an access point to a deeper relationship with Maureen, a richer relationship with Maureen. So the soul of me does not resist. I always use this example of us being born. Before we're born, before we take on a body, we're simply spirit. And we come through this comfortable womb, through a tiny little birth canal, and birth is messy. So that is how I know that the soul is comfortable with the messy, because the soul is taking on a body, and to get into the body is a messy experience. So culture teaches us, and I think without going off on too much of a tangent, I think a lot of it has to do with this information age that we've moved into, because when you look back anthropologically over generations and generations, there have been many, many, many times in human history where we were very connected to the mystical and to the wisdom. And many indigenous cultures, most indigenous cultures, are still really more connected to the wisdom. And so through the information age, like Joe was saying, we've cut off, and I always share the original definition of the word psychology is the study of the soul. And it's been reduced to the study of the mind. But when you're talking, Maureen, about the soul, that's why the soul doesn't resist anything that might feel painful, because my soul knows that when I listen to you talk about the loss of your parents, for instance, I can feel closer to you than if you hadn't brought that up. And so the soul leans in. The soul doesn't differentiate between an uncomfortable emotion and a comfortable emotion. The soul's just always leaning in, because your soul can use anything to become more deeply connected to another human being, because all the soul wants while it's here is to love. And the soul doesn't care what doorway or portal you give me. The soul is just, I'm going to love Maureen however I can. And then to speak to what you noticed about what Devon shared about how we're taught to numb out and avoid, the soul is comfortable with the messy, but we haven't been taught to be comfortable with the messy, because we have been taught to identify ourselves more as the human being part of us rather than the soul having a human experience. And so through a capitalistic society and a consumer society, we value the external. And the soul, though, is not needing to shop it away, talk it away. The soul is comfortable. But I'm appreciating what you said, Devon, because I think that so many people can relate, myself included. Even to this day, as much as I practice, something uncomfortable can come up and I can find myself reaching for whatever I'm reaching for, be it a glass of wine or a certain kind of a food, or I'll call a girlfriend, or there's so many different ways that we've been taught to resist because we've been externally indoctrinated. So I love both of those things. And through these simple practices that we're sharing today, one simple takeaway, if you are listening and you're recognizing, oh, I'm the person that reaches for a glass of wine at 5, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. Just give yourself 3 minutes before you reach for the glass of wine. And just in 3 minutes, just simply say, my intention is to create a safe space for these emotions. And my intention is to simply become interested and listen for the message. 30 seconds, 3 minutes. And then if you want to go pour yourself a glass of wine, absolutely nothing about that. It's about just learning, because I think to that point, often we unconsciously think, ooh, if I'm going to open a Pandora's box and I think it's going to overwhelm me. So we often don't even go there. But that is not what happens. It's just like a child. When a child is in a supermarket and they're having a big temper tantrum, when you don't even say a word to that child, but you just are present with that child and the child feels seen, the tantrum subsides. And so it's antithetical to how we've been taught. But when you say, I'm just going to sit with this for 3 minutes, then I'm going to pour my glass of wine. That's a beautiful doorway in. It's just the quality of those moments will induce more, right? So thank you. Both of those points are very well taken. Joe, any takeaways or anything you want to share?
Suzi, what you just said I meant to speak to earlier, because our first 3 was about the centering, intention setting, and sacred listening. And then that's why the emotional messenger system comes after that, because in the sacred listening, I'm not judging the emotion. You know, what my intention is to be present with myself, to center, be present with myself, and then listen, what's really going on in terms of the emotional messenger system at any given point in time. The other thing that Devon said that I thought, oh, that's spot on. And I'll just go out and say, I believe that all addiction are unmet needs and they're unprocessed emotions. We're looking for a way to be present. We just don't know how because we haven't been taught. You know,
Yeah.
like you're saying, it's antithetical for me to lean in and even want to lean into anger or
Yeah.
rage or sadness or grief. But if I have the understanding that these are all for me in some way, like
Yeah.
for real, and for those of you listening, just try it. Don't let our words, let your own life have the experience of leaning into an emotion and bringing in the curiosity and becoming interested in what it might have for you, as I've learned to do for myself. What does this have? Because it's for me, not to me, not against me.
Yeah.
It's trying to liberate me. Let's be liberated and untangled all the messiness so I can be more of a free spirit, so I can be
Yeah.
more at peace, so I can be more available to my soul's calling, to whatever the essence is seeking to share with me in whatever form. So I don't judge addictions at all. They're cries for help. Their cries for a deeper understanding. And that's why I think this work is just so incredible in terms of addressing all those unmet needs, that
Yeah.
I get to meet them, not
Yeah.
something outside myself. I meet them. And that's where the real, like, what? The reparenting
Well,
going on.
I really appreciate what you're sharing about addiction specifically, because those of us who have dealt with or currently deal with any form of addiction, whether it's as simple like Devon was saying of numbing out and shopping or pouring a glass of wine, whatever it is, anyone who grapples with a relationship with addiction, the heart of all addiction is the inability to know how to be present with
Mm,
the part of us that just feels so dang uncomfortable. So, at the heart of most addiction, and I'm simplifying a very layered issue, but at the heart of most addiction is a belief that says, I'm not worthy. I'm not okay. I'm a burden. I'm not okay how I am. I'm not enough. Something's wrong
mm,
with me. I'm alone. I feel disconnected. At the heart of an addiction is a misbelief about the self,
right.
which is understandable. If we've had certain experiences, if someone has disrespected my boundaries over and over as a child, going to then believe, oh, well, something must be wrong with me. And so, at the heart of the addiction, this is why I love this work, is the cry for education. It's a cry for tools. It's a cry for how can I be with this pain? I don't know how to be with this pain. So back to Devon, that's why I'm going to numb out. That's why I need to shop, because I can't be with the pain. It really isn't at the end of the day as much about I think I'm not enough as I don't know how to be with the pain of feeling like I'm not enough. So I have to go reach for this outside thing. But when we are taught this language of how to be present and
Mm,
to sit with and say, oh my gosh, it's so understandable that you would think you're a burden. It's so understandable that you would think something's wrong with you. It's so understandable that you would think you need to just numb out and disconnect. It's so understandable that this feels too painful to sit with. Tell me about that. I'm right here. And sometimes with addiction, specifically, this is why a therapeutic relationship and working with a coach and calling a friend, because we are interdependent being. And sometimes I know in my past it's been too much for me to sit with my own feelings of abandonment. And those moments when I reached out and called a friend or had a session with someone, those moments were golden because it was too much for me Why? Because no one had modeled to me that I wasn't too much. No one had said to me, your feelings are not too much for me. So when I called a friend or I called a coach, they might not have said those specific words, but they were basically reflecting back to me, your pain is not too much for me.
Mm.
And then I could then internalize, my pain is not too much for me.
Mm.
And that is, like you have been describing, that is a process over time, and why I wanted the four of us to be in conversation. So anyone out there who's feeling alone,
Mm-hmm.
feeling like, I don't know how to sit with this pain. It feels really sharp. It feels really overwhelming. It feels really consuming. I am afraid that if I open this, who knows what's going to happen. Reach out, someone, find a coach, or simply hear this conversation, that you are not alone and that we all experience in our own way the same feelings of overwhelm. And through this practice, right, you will learn how to be present with that. So I thank you specifically for talking about addiction. And addiction is an extreme form of numbing out, an extreme form of pushing down. And it's no different than if I go shopping this afternoon, it's an extreme form of not being able to be with these very painful emotions. So thank you for presencing that. And Devon, anything that you want to share, any takeaways, anything else?
I really appreciated, Joe, what you said about unmet needs and how ultimately we are 100% responsible for our own life and we can meet our own needs. And we're all doing what we're doing in life because we're trying to get our needs met. And I have to say, I feel as though there's so many layered gifts and benefits from the emotional messenger system, but the core for me is that slowly over time, it enabled me to come to the realization and to have the inner experience that my well-being and my worthiness are actually independent of the external world. And that experience has allowed me to move through the world in a way where I am less attached and less needing everyone to show up in a certain way in order for me to feel good and feel more empowered, because I know that I meet my own needs. And it allows me to move through the world more free, more balanced, less attached. And that to me has been the greatest gift.
That's so beautifully put. And I think it's a perfect full circle comment and description, because where we started was with safety and compassion. And when we don't experience inner safety, it's very challenging for us to really take responsibility for our life. So if I'm judging myself, it's very challenging for me to judge myself and take responsibility for my life at the same time. Because if I'm judging myself, I'm thinking something's wrong. So I'm not going to take responsibility. So what you're sharing is that it comes back to the inner safety. When I decide and I make a decision, I don't want to continue living my life in a consciousness of self-judgment and self-criticism. And I embark upon a journey that says, I want my inner consciousness to be a safe space. Then it invites that 98%. Oh, I can move inwardly, and I'm going to be more willing to take responsibility for my life because there isn't judgment there. There's an invitation there. And when there is safety, what you're speaking about, Devon, the needs. So we all had needs when we were young, many of which were not fulfilled when we were young. And those needs are still very present in our heart today. And when you begin to cultivate a consciousness of inner safety, the needs will then come out. You will just start hearing them. I need you to rest more. I need you to play more. I need you to be kinder to me. I need you to take more time. I need you to get off that treadmill of doing and busy. The needs will come. They will surface. And when you begin to hear the needs and then fulfill on those needs, you will find yourself taking responsibility for your own life and not needing anybody else to act or be a certain kind of a way. You will have the dominion. Oh, it might be a courageous act to give myself more rest or to give myself more of what I need. I have dominion over fulfilling my own inner needs that were not met. And that takes the other person off the hook of needing to show up for us in any way, shape, or form. So for everyone listening to go, hopefully have a few tools to go sit with yourself and create that inner safety. We love this conversation. Please let us know, email, DM us how this is helpful, what you want to hear more about, because these three individuals in front of you, you all really do the practice. It's so clear. It's so evident that you are practicing. This is your world, and you've given everyone so much. So thank you. Thank you, Devon. Thank you, Maureen. Thank you, Joe. I'm deeply appreciative, and here's to more of the same. Do you guys want to say any goodbyes before we go?
I'll just say thank you, Suzi, for creating these teachings, for creating the space. And I just know that the listeners got so much today. So I'm just grateful to be here.
Yeah, thanks.
Mhm.
Joe?
Yeah, I'll just echo what Maureen just said. Thank you, Suzi. I mean, I know my life has changed as a result of practicing the teachings. It's not perfecting it, but it is practicing it. So thank you. Thank you,
Yeah.
everyone. Yeah.
Thank you. Deb?
Yeah, I just find these type of dialogue and conversations so nourishing and really deeply internally satisfying. So thank you for creating this opportunity for us to connect in this way.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because I think, as I find, and you guys probably do too, in conversation with clients and friends, I think we're all really void of soul in this world, and we're all seeking and longing these soulful, connected conversations. I hear that from friends and clients every single day. We feel like islands. We're thirsty. We're hungry for these deeper, soulful conversations, which is why I wanted to have the three of you on for these conversations. So I'm appreciating what you're saying, Devon, and hopefully everyone's leaving a little more soul satisfied. Give yourselves permission to thrive this week, and we will see you back next week. So much love, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. If there was something in this conversation that spoke to you, we'd so appreciate it if you would take the time to subscribe, leave a 5-star review, and share this episode with women and mothers you know, because you are here to thrive. See you next time.